Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagan, and we're back here in studio today. We've got John Hendrickson and Sarah Curry here with us. And so sit down, relax, buckle up for the most exciting show in Iowa conservative politics, or at least that's what I'm calling it today. Because, man, we have got, you want to be thrills. We're going to talk about kind of the nitty gritty on how property taxes work. But before that, I want to double check. We're all kind of think tank people with a variety of backgrounds. John, I'll go to you first. Are you extra sure that you don't have any classified government documents here or at home?
I don't want to answer that question.
Okay. Sarah?
No, not unless Peppa Pig's latest episode
All right.
is classified.
So, Sarah, you've worked at a variety of think tanks. Have you ever done a tour at the Penn Biden Center?
No, I have not.
Okay.
No.
I'm reliably led to believe that is just a make-work organization for the shadow government, but...
You know, let's be optimistic and say they've produced something. I've never read it or heard it or seen it referenced, so we'll go with that.
Well, not a primary source for the work of the Iowans for Tax Relief Foundation either. Okay. Very good. All right. Shortly before we sat down to record this, Governor Reynolds was officially inaugurated to her second full term in office. And John, you and I were looking over the comments of her speech a little bit. And I asked you, could you appreciate Governor Reynolds any more than you did before when you found out that she was quoting Calvin Coolidge in her speech? So
I really enjoyed that.
Did you? Well, I'm gonna read this, and it's just a nice quote. The real heart of the American government depends on the heart of the people, and then uses that as her entry into what she sees in Iowans.
It would have been even better if she would have put some in by Herbert Hoover.
Yeah, there's always room to grow.
That's right.
As any leader will tell you, they can always improve.
But you know, her speech, her condition of the state speech, really had some Coolidge themes.
Yeah.
Not just looking at cutting taxes, but also streamlining government. Mm-hmm. Her policy to reduce the administrative state of Iowa from 37 to 16 agencies will bring in roughly, I think it's, I forget the number, but $200 and some million in taxpayer savings. Her executive order on regulatory reform. These are all really fiscally conservative principles that Calvin Coolidge would have applauded, and we certainly applaud them. They're just good policy, and I think she understands that. And in her speech, I don't have the exact quote, but she said, "Government, if you don't keep it in check, continues to grow," and I think this government reorganization is a great idea.
I'm really excited to find out what else is in that proposal too, because I know that it factors into her budget that she's put forward, and that's well into the 100-page range on that. So to pull that apart, but yes, I was thinking about that proposal as well. We've done a lot of big conservative reforms in Iowa over the last 6 years since Republican control, and at some point, and it's still exciting, is that you get down to simply governing a conservative state. And it doesn't always have to be a landmark conservative reform straight out of, national think tank circles. It can be the more basic blocking and tackling of making government work better and getting more out of your tax dollars. So it's the exciting stuff that we're going to, what do they do year after year in places like Utah and Idaho and reliably red states. And that's the stuff that we're starting to work on in Iowa. And so it's exciting. She had a couple other quotes that I thought were just great in her speech today, kind of setting Iowa out as the example across the country. But she leaned on a Margaret Thatcher quote about asking a woman. But then, if refreshing that quote for today, it would go something like this: if you want something done right, ask an Iowan. And talking about, John, I'm not going to ask you to comment on that because I know your perspectives, but things are going great in Iowa. and we still value those American ideals of hard work and free enterprise, and it's great. And then this is something that resonated with me because of what she's been through and how much courage she's shown, but and talked about the moral conviction to do what was right. And she said, anyone can have a 10-point plan to save America. Not everyone has the moral compass to do it. And I think that's the real dividing line with a lot of people, is that it's an easy thing to say what you think the right path forward is, but putting it into action and holding true to your convictions, that's the real mark of a strong leader.
Yeah.
And so
I just want to say one quick thing about that, because I think the governor doesn't get enough credit, because there's so much national attention on someone like Governor DeSantis. But really, Governor Reynolds deserves a lot of credit for not just the fiscal conservative policies, but really standing up to the woke agenda, to these to the insanity of the progressive left. And I think she's done a really good job and doesn't really get enough credit for that.
I've said this before. You go out traveling across the country or talking with colleagues from around the country in some of our counterpart organizations, and ask the question, what about your governor? Because they're curious, they want to know. And I wouldn't trade my governor for anybody else's in the country.
Yeah.
Full stop.
And there's 2 listeners in my home state
Yes.
who are regular listeners that really love Governor Reynolds.
Well, they should.
And they wish they could trade Governor Walz for Governor Reynolds.
But they wouldn't go so far as to trade states.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, we're going to do something maybe a little bit different from kind of the usual way we do things. But Sarah's here and has written considerably on Iowa's property tax system, and a reminder that a lot of the work that's been done is in the ITR Foundation Property Tax Toolkit, which we think has a lot of really good ideas on property tax, but in addition to just the history of the system. But Sarah, I hope I'm not putting you too much on the spot, but we wanted to kind of do a really quick, what do some of these things mean when we talk about property taxes? Because not all of our listeners are, dive deep into this stuff like we do. So I'll kick it off by just letting you give some thoughts on the system, whether it's good or bad, its complexity, its transparency, and all that stuff. So I'm going to start by not asking you a question, but just letting you go for a little while.
Well, so I love legislative history. And when you look at Iowa's property tax system and how it's evolved over time, and you compare that to other states, relatively, we're not that bad. That said, there's a lot of states out there that are pretty messed up in property taxes. So
And you're talking about how it actually
works. And so there's different types of limitations. Like, for example, the assessments. Your assessor goes out, they assess your home. They're supposed to assess it at 100% market value. And then we have some different levers, I guess, that adjust that. Other states have more egregious levers that have unintended bad policy consequences, California being the most egregious. So Iowa's rollback overall isn't that bad.
So I'm going to...
See, I'm diving in
because
you're diving
I live this
stuff.
I want to make this kind of basic. So assessments. The county has an assessor that goes out, well, maybe not go out, but knows how big your home is, roughly what its overall finish is, its neighborhood, comparable sales, and they decide what is a fair assessed value of your home.
Right. So assessed value means if you were to put your house on the market to sell it, that's the price that they're trying to...
That's the goal, at least, of the assessment system.
Right. And like they assess it, and then they only assess it every so often. And so obviously the market changes within that,
right.
Which is why we have equalization.
Okay.
And so
what is equalization?
So equalization is the state trying to help these assessors essentially get to that 100% of market value, or that true sales rate. So what everybody doesn't realize is when you're looking at Zillow and you're going through all the sales, every time there's a sale in your county, there's a statistic that's calculated. And what it is, it's comparing the assessed value to the purchase price of that home. And if it's really far out of whack, a lot of times with a lot of sales, the Department of Revenue will come in and say, for agricultural property or for residential property, you need to equalize your assessments because they're either too far above or too far below that 100% of market value. So that's the first thing that Iowa does to try to keep everything fair and equal, to make sure everyone's assessed value is accurate.
With one exception, that's not how we treat agricultural land in Iowa, right?
What,
That
the
is-
equalization?
Well, no, okay, I'm back to the actual assessed value. That's based off the productivity formula.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah,
So that we
agricultural
work
value
on
is...
agricultural
Yeah,
land
there's this
differently.
complicated formula for ag value, and it takes into account like the price of soybeans and corn and all that. But for all intents and purposes, yes, that's
Okay.
their
And
assessed
then,
value,
And then once that assessed value is, then we try and equalize that
right?
to make it fairer and accurate.
Right, that's correct.
Okay, so you get through all of that, but that's not the amount that we pay tax on,
Right,
correct?
right,
Which comes now into the idea of a rollback.
right. So the equalization, all that is to get your market value of your property. Then we have the rollback percentage. And so I'll make it super easy to understand. So if you have your home and it's assessed at $250,000, and let's say there's a 50% rollback, that means the taxable value, so what they can levy against, is only $125,000.
So then that's the part that when you see all those line items on your property tax,
Exactly.
it's based off the taxable value. I mean, in a very rough sense, it's a little similar to your, not similar, but you have an adjusted gross income that you pay tax on. On your income tax side, you get your deductions and then you pay off.
It's
of
exactly the
that
same
rate.
thing. You might make $75,000 a year, but you're only paying tax on $50,000 of it. It's the exact same way rollback works. The state calculates out a percentage for the different types of property, whether it being residential, ag, commercial, and then the value that comes out of that is what your tax levy is applied to give you your final property tax bill.
Okay. So then when you talk about a levy rate or a millage rate, that's the multiplier that you would get on the taxable value.
Exactly.
After the rollback. So you get these line items, whether it's your city, your county, your school, county hospital, brucellosis, whatever, all of those lines have a dollars per thousand. And how there's a lot of those lines.
There's a lot of them. But like, for example, the most popular for schools is the $5.40 per 1,000, which goes into the school funding formula. That's
Right.
that's a levy rate, that $5.40. For cities, it's $8.10 for their general fund levy. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
So once we go through equalization and rollback, you have your taxable value, and then we have all these levies, which I would argue there's way too many of them in Iowa, but that's for another podcast. And then we take all of those levies and we apply them to that
Yes.
taxable value, and that's how you get your property tax bill.
And so if you went on your property tax statement and looked at schools, so I live in the Waukee Community School District. It's not just, there's a lot of individual components that go into the line that you see on your property tax statement.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah, the line that you see on your property tax bill isn't just one levy. For cities, it could be a dozen different
Right.
levies, and they
And
just aggregate
They
it all and
aggregate
put it
that.
into one
so,
number.
yeah, you
Right.
don't see the 810 levy. You see the 810 plus the whatever and so on. And
Exactly,
supplement it
yeah.
all down. Okay. Are we all up to speed, John?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
you just
Yep.
put the mic
Yeah,
down and we're just enjoying the view out the window here while we
Yes.
got to go. Okay, good. I just want to make sure you're with us. Okay, I'm going to try you out on one more idea.
Okay.
Explain to me the ag tie, which these are linked in what we pay between residential and commercial and agriculture. How does that work?
So when we talk about ag tie, this is rollback. So
Okay.
that's what we're talking
We're
about.
back
So
to rollback.
We're back to rollback. And it's getting to that taxable value is what we're trying to get at. And so what the state of Iowa did is they wanted to put an assessment limit on the books. So that way, if your assessments grew at 25, 30% in a year, that wouldn't affect you. And this is because it happened during the 1970s when we had all this inflation. So that's when all of this started. So essentially what it means is if agricultural value grows by 2%, then residential property can only increase by 2%. And that was just no, there's a 3% cap on this. It used to be 4%, but we dropped it in 2013.
Right.
But if agricultural value decreases, then the growth for a residential property is 0.
Yes.
So ag and residential are tied together And so whoever grows the least affects the other one.
Okay.
Now, so in the history that we've been looking at this, residential has never affected ag. Ag has always affected residential.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it's good if you're a homeowner because instead of being assessed at like 100% of your value, we're right around that 50% level because that's what the rollback is based on the ag tie.
So kind of circling back to, okay, so we've explained this. When we talk about reforming the system, it's a complicated system. Might not be quite as complicated as California's, but there's a lot that goes into it in terms of all the different levies. There's a lot that goes into it with assessments and equalization and rollback. And it's understandably frustrating for an individual homeowner or property owner of any kind, because all that really matters to me is what I pay, right? I don't care. I mean, I care what the assessed value is. I mean, you want to see that your home's worth more, but I don't care what this millage rate is. I care what I pay. So anyway, I think that's kind of an important thing. And so you've talked a lot about trying to bring some transparency and simplicity. Maybe we can start merging some of these different levies together and making one unified rate for cities, or at least.
Yeah, that would be helpful, right? If every city, say, was capped at, and I'm throwing out a number here, let's say instead of $8.10, we get rid of a dozen other little tiny levies and we throw them all at $15. At least then, if you live in Waukee, you live in Sioux City, or you live in Muscatine, right, every city is capped at $15 per $1,000 evaluation. And that just helps make it a little bit more fair, I think, and easier to understand. But again, those are some of the reform ideas we put in the toolkit.
And I think too, yes, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. Broadly speaking, John, and this is where I might need you to kind of jump back in and help us land the plane here, is that we can move some things around, change assessment or rollback or merge levies, and there may be some really good ideas in there. I don't want to discount that, but moving the fundamental thing that we need to do to save property taxes is limit the amount of money that local government can spend in Iowa. Correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So we can reform the system and make it more transparent, and we should. But we need to be mindful of the main thing, which is if we're going to be serious about property taxes, we're going to be serious about bending the curve down on what Iowans pay, it has to come from limiting what they can spend, not who pays it.
That's absolutely right. And I think that rule applies to any tax that we're talking about, whether it's property or income.
Right.
Because, if you want to do serious tax relief, you need to address the spending. And I think that's one of the main arguments of the property tax toolkit is that, when Sarah and I looked at one of the reasons why past laws did not work so well is that they failed to address spending. Assessment limits have problems, and some of these other ideas have problems. But, if you fail to address spending, then you're not going to see much property tax relief.
Thinking back, the 2012 commercial property tax bill that we did, it shifted it.
Yes,
it shifted the obligation onto the state general fund. And then 2 years ago, when the state began picking up the payments for county mental health services, and we've talked about, sometimes those savings were passed on, but a lot of times they weren't. Counties just continued to go ahead and levy more and more. And I guess I'll wrap this up with this idea, and I've said it several times on this podcast and other places. The state legislature has shown the way. Governor Reynolds has shown the way. It is discipline with your spending at the state level, separating wants from needs, focusing on the core functions of government and funding those and making sure they do well. And then the taxpayer wins after that. So last year's historic tax bill, which cut income taxes, with a 3.9% flat tax, the foundation for that was fiscal conservatism and limited government and not spending every dollar you have. Now we need to move to doing that at the local level. And so how do we, and it appears to be, tell me if I'm wrong, that most local governments in Iowa don't seem to share that same idea, that we are going to limit our spending so that we can ultimately be in a position to have it work to the benefit of our residents and our property owners.
You're exactly right, because right now, if I'm a city, I can limit my spending. I can lower my property tax. Like, if there's a huge assessment increase, I don't need a change to the equalization formula or to the rollback or anything like that. I can choose to lower it, but we haven't seen any communities doing that. They might be growing less than others, but none that I know of are actually going backwards, giving more back to their taxpayers. And that's the thing. You can tweak rollback. You can tweak equalization. You can tweak all of these things. But if somebody wants to spend the money, they're going to find a way to do it.
That's right.
And they're just going to bypass the other rules and find a new levy or a new this or a new that. And that's why the system really needs to be reformed. And you have to address the spending. Because if the spending's not there, then there's no reason to tax.
That's right. And there's clearly what one of our colleagues calls the honesty gap within property taxes, because and we've heard this from people who've shared their experiences with us. Well, they'll say, well, my city council or my county supervisor told me that they're actually lowering my rate, but why is my bill higher? Because they're taking advantage of windfalls and from assessment windfalls, and that creates this honesty gap that needs to be corrected, because just because assessments go up X number of percent doesn't mean that local government budgets should go up by the same percent. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed.
Yes, it does. And seems that often the first response to that from particularly cities and counties as well, we're going to have to cut police and fire. And we look at city budgets around here. You guys probably more than I do. There's plenty of places to find budget savings in your average city or county budget without cutting your police and fire protection.
100%. And, I'm going to use an example close to home, right? It's going to be 50 degrees this weekend. And Pottawatomie County owns a ski resort. Okay?
Those are amenities for our citizens that they want.
Look, I'm going to take
I've heard it all, Sarah.
I know. Well, look, I'm going to take my kid up there and I'm going to teach him how to ski at Mount Crescent. Like, I love the fact that it's there and I don't have to drive all the way to Colorado to teach my kid to ski. I get it. But should the taxpayers of Pottawatomie County be paying for that, or should me as a patron just pay a little bit more when I take my kid up there to go ski? As the person I am, I would argue that I just need to pay more. It's a user fee, right? The taxpayers at Pot County that probably aren't even benefiting from it, they don't need to pay for that. And so again, let's talk about reining in our spending. In that situation, why don't you get rid of the ski resort, sell it to a private business who is better suited to run that type of enterprise, and focus on the things that citizens want: roads, police, EMS, fire, those types of things. Because when I pay taxes, that's what I think it should go towards, not, all this other frivolous stuff, which is, again, nice to have, but not a necessity for government.
I will end with this. Having been a former legislator, I know it's difficult. And I know that you talk about limiting spending. That can be difficult. Not giving money to a program that somebody's asking for. And cutting taxes can be difficult because there's always somebody saying we need to do more. But those folks that are there, absent there's a lot of new members this year, that they've made those hard decisions. They have taken the arrows. They've had to go back home and look the folks in the eye and said, we needed to do this. It was the right thing to do, and we couldn't fund your program. And they've done that. They should expect that their locals can do the same, and they should almost be offended that the answer is no, and they should almost be offended that the answer is you guys need to pay for it. No, we made those decisions in our budget, and it's not our responsibility to pay for you because you can't make the same decision.
Yeah, and this goes back to your point that you opened with, Chris, about this is what the state has done, and it reminded me of what the governor said in her address on Tuesday, and she said, when we did the tax cut in 2018, and then this past year, the media and critics said, the sky is going to fall in Iowa, that all these services are going to be cut, and just the opposite happened. I mean, revenues are still very good, and so yes, fiscal discipline is not easy, but it can be done. The governor and the legislature have proven it, and a lot of Iowans, whether around the family table or in the small business, have to make those decisions as well.
Fiscal conservatism works. Limited government works. Free enterprise is the path forward to greater opportunity and success for everyone. And that's why we do what we do. So, okay, I think we've covered it. Sarah, you've already reminded me that we need to do this again so that we can go in a little deeper. And then I just got the time to wrap it up signal from outside the window, which is we decided to record this podcast because we were waiting for our lunch order to get here, and it's here. So hooray. Anyway, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to share the podcast with your friends, like and subscribe, or whatever the more accomplished podcasters would tell you to do at the end of an episode. But we appreciate you being a part of it, and we will see you next time on ITR Live.